What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Saturdays in the SEC, episode 85. Got a pretty jam-packed one tonight as we enter the month of August, week 5 of our SEC preview series. Got two really interesting teams, I think, tonight that y'all are going to enjoy. And then the big news of the last week or so, again, is conference realignment. It's been at the forefront for the past year or two now, but especially here over the summer as teams are positioning themselves for 2024. I think it's safe to say the Pac-12 has imploded on itself. The Pac-12 is about to be no more as we've come to expect and have talked about for most of this year. But kind of get your thoughts, Carden, on four Pac-12 teams going to the Big Ten and four going to the Big 12. Just a crazy thing with this conference realignment, like we've talked about this year. Just it's looking more and more like two power conferences eventually.
I agree, and I think that it feels to me, and it might be a little SEC bias here, you know how it is, but it seems to me that everybody is trying to play catch up with the SEC because just because you have more and you're getting more doesn't mean more is not always better. The best product in college football is hands down the SEC, especially with adding Oklahoma and Texas. These other teams or other conferences are adding up and trying to get as many teams as they can, trying to broaden their TV network and things like that, and the people that they reach and their audience are trying to broaden that audience. So I understand the reason they're doing it. It's more money, and the Pac-12, like you said, is folding in on themselves. They've done themselves no favors. I mean, it was their commissioner said, "Oh, we're going to be all right," and then literally the next day it was like, "Okay, this is a problem," because everybody was bouncing out of town. So I think everybody's trying to play catch up and give themselves a chance when next year comes around and it's 12-team playoff and things like that. You know, trying to play better competition to help themselves out. I mean, we still got there's smaller schools like UAB and such moving up to the American Conference. That's a big jump for them. So I mean, it's all over the place. I'm enjoying it. It's going to look a lot different next year. I mean, I'm going to have to sit down and study the conferences because I can't just name them off the top of my head like I can now. I'm gonna have to sit down and actually look at it and memorize it. But I think it's really fun. But I do agree with what Eli Drinkwitz said about it. He's saying, you know, these teams are going across country and adding teams in their division or in their conference, like the Big Ten did and the Big 12's doing. You know, USC and UCLA and teams like that, and Oregon and Washington now and Arizona, and they're going to be playing teams on the East Coast. And he's right about football. It doesn't really affect them in football because it's the weekend. They can get back home. They have all day Sunday to relax and get back on their regular time. But you know, the baseball, the basketball, the softball, tennis, track, all that stuff. They're doing stuff in the midweeks and during the week, and they got school the next day, and they're going to fly across country to California, and if I have to fly all the way back across country to the East Coast, they're going to be changing time zones 3 different times, and they got to go to class next morning. They get back at 3 a.m. It's just it. I think it's going to be some hiccups in the road there with other sports, but with football, I think it's perfectly fine. But I do think I kind of think he went really hard on them a little bit, you know, talking about the other sports and saying that it's not good for the student athletes and they really aren't caring about student athletes. I disagree. These student athletes aren't student athletes. They're athlete students. We've always said that, but they definitely are now. They're pretty much professional athletes. Majority of them are getting paid in some type of way. So I think it'll buff out, you know, but that's on the football side, the softball, the basketball, the baseball. They aren't getting paid near as much as these football players are. So it'll work itself out and the kinks will get ironed out as the years go. But I'm excited to see how these conference realignments just affects the sports as a whole.
Yeah, I think you're right and make a good point about how it affects other sports more so than just football. Because a lot of these decisions are based on football because that's what brings in the most money, most revenue for all of these schools. So it is crazy with the Big Ten adding originally 2 teams from the West Coast. Now it's 4 with Oregon and Washington. The Big 12's adding Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah, which I think makes a lot of sense for their region. So, but the craziest thing is like there's discussions about Stanford and Cal maybe joining the ACC, which is just wild to me. How can you have two California teams in the Atlantic Coast Conference? I mean,
That's what I'm saying.
there's
The furthest away they can be.
yeah, it just some of this does not make any sense at all. Especially that move if it were to come to fruition, but it just kind of shows you the desperation maybe of
Yeah.
some of these conferences trying to keep up, and not make it just a power two, try to make it a power three or a power four, with the Pac-12 pretty much dissolved now. The Big 12's done a really good job of capitalizing and adding, some quality teams from the Pac-12 and that makes sense for their region as well. So, and then the ACC obviously is trying to make moves as well because Florida State's been a little unhappy recently with the revenue sharing in the ACC.
As they should.
Clemson behind the scenes is kind of been monitoring this, and I think kind of discreetly, kind of checking other things out. So, so the ACC is trying to do their best to hang in that power two or power three. I think one of the most interesting things about all of this, and Greg Sankey actually touched on it today, is they're definitely going to look into, obviously with the 12-team playoff, there being initially was going to be 6 automatic bids, 6 at large, but with the way the conference realignment's going, they're definitely going to be narrowing that down, it seems. I think that's a very good thing. We've been proponents all along of just being the 12 best teams.
Right.
Just doing basically 12 at large and not having any, automatic qualifiers, basically.
Because all the conference champions are going to be in the top 12 teams majority of the time. So it's no need for the automatic bid.
And because a lot of this too is with the conference realignment, there's not really 6 quality conferences now that are really worthy of a playoff spot. You know what I'm saying? Like initially it was going to be the 6 highest ranked conference champions were going to have automatic, qualification into the playoff. But now there's really not 6 conferences that are worthy of an automatic playoff spot. There's just not. I mean, especially with the Pac-12's gone now. Some of these, you may have 3 or 4 probably. I think they may go to 4 possibly, but I hope they just go to the best 12. Obviously, the SEC and the Big Ten are going to be pushing for that because that's more playoff spots for them because they have the majority of the good teams. So, Greg Sankey and the Big Ten commissioner, they're going to be pushing for just the 12 best, which would be nice. We'll kind of getting into our SEC previews. I think it's fair to say probably 2 of the sleeper teams in the SEC this year, Arkansas and Kentucky. I've been really excited to dive into these 2 teams. Really like what both of these coaches have done at their school. Mark Stoops obviously has a long track record of building Kentucky up and kind of taking them to new heights, or at least heights they haven't seen in a long time. And then what Sam Pittman's done at Arkansas has been really incredible. Just the program he inherited and how he's built them up, consistently able to compete in the SEC has been really fun to see. But starting out with Arkansas and looking at them going into the 2023 season, the 2 big things that stick out to me are their quarterback and their running back room is elite.
Probably the best in the country, honestly.
Yeah, I mean they've got the best backfield in the SEC. Like you said, probably one of the tops in the country. Really excited to see what KJ Jefferson can do in his final year. He's got Dan Enos, a new offensive coordinator, and a loaded running back room. So I think this is going to be a heavy, run-centric offense, as they typically are. And then at the wide receiver spot, kind of in familiar territory because KJ Jefferson, he's used to throwing to a bunch of different guys. You had Treylon Burks 2 years ago. Threw to him, he was gone. You had Jaden Hazelwood and Neighbors last year. And then those guys are gone now. So you got a whole new cast of wide receivers again this year, really for the 3rd year in a row for Arkansas. So I don't think it's unfamiliar territory for KJ Jefferson to have to, get used to throwing to new guys. They went heavy transfer portal for this position. Isaac Tesla, what was I believe a Division II or Division III wide receiver, had over 1,000 yards, big target, 6'4", 215. They've been very impressed with him. Bryce Stevens is returning for another year. Isaiah Satinga is going to be a second-year receiver for them. Didn't play much last year, but was their highest-rated recruit a year ago. So I think he's going to play a big role in the slot for them. But just kind of looking at this roster, what are your thoughts about Arkansas? I know you've been pretty high on them, but just kind of what's your thoughts about KJ returning? That this offense should be pretty explosive, and just your general thoughts on Arkansas this year.
I think, obviously, like I said, I've been high on them. I think the offense is going to have to carry them. I mean, you look at their defense last year, the defensive they ranked 123rd in total defense, 130 in passing defense. So their secondary's got to step up. I mean, absolutely, they've got to step up. They had Catalan last year, was a big name, but their secondary couldn't get it together. They got burnt a lot. They were able to get pressure on the quarterback. They set their single season sack record for Arkansas, but they weren't able to defend on the backside of their defense. So I think that's another question mark this year. What is Travis Williams going to do? He was talking about, they're going to fly to the ball. They're going to get to the ball. They're going to play relentless, and they're going to play hard. You can guarantee that. But he said he's going to disguise a lot of blitzes. He's going to bring a lot of blitzes. He's going to have to try to pretty much force some pressure on the quarterback with his front seven. Because they said they're going to play some 4-man fronts mainly, but they're also going to go in some odd man fronts as well on the D line. But he said he's going to try to force some pressure on with his linebackers through blitzes and stuff, which is nothing new. We saw him do that last year at UCF, and he wasn't the DC at Auburn, but he had his hand in the linebacker room, and he was a linebacker coach. He had his hand in that defense and disguising blitzes and pressures, and he did a great job at Auburn. Obviously, he played there, but I loved him as a coach there. He's a high-energy guy. The players seem to love him everywhere he's been, so I'm excited for that. But, yeah, that offensive backfield, man, it's definitely the best in the SEC, in my opinion. It's probably top 5 in the country. They're really good. They're seasoned. They're vets, man. You got Rocket Sanders, who's the best of both worlds. The dude can lower his shoulder and run right through you. He can dance around you. He can make plays with his feet. He can make plays with his strength. He's the all-time running back, in my opinion. Like, I love this dude. I hate when he plays against Auburn, but I love watching this guy on Saturdays. We know what Dan Enos can do. I remember me and you talked a couple of years ago when we first started this podcast about Dan Enos. I know it had been a couple years since he had been coaching at Alabama when we started this podcast, but I remember our conversations about him. I mean, he was there in 2018 when they went undefeated and then lost in the national championship game. Anything can happen in that game, but what he did with Tua that year, and I think KJ is excited about that. Dan Enos said that he's more of a pro style guy, but he said you have to adapt in today's game where you're going to be watching from the outside. So he said he's a pro style guy, obviously, but he's going to mix in some of the RPOs and things like that and let KJ do what he can do and read the defenses and him make the decisions. But he said that you can expect to see him huddling up a little bit to control that clock. They're going to have some dual tight end sets as well. And so I'm excited to see how that plays out. It's going to look a little different from last year, but they definitely need a little kick from last year. I mean, they went offensive scoring, they were 34th and 7th in rushing and 62nd in passing. So they kind of progressed a little bit, but overall they were top. They were 15th into the season, 15th in the nation in total defense or total offense. I think this year with a little inexperience in the secondary that they're going to have to not inexperience, but the way they played last year, they're going to have to step it up. I think that they're going to have to rely on the offense to really carry them through and put up some big numbers. I mean, last year they scored 32.5 points a game and they gave up 30 points a game. That's just, I mean, they were ranked 100th in points given up on defense. So their offense is the catalyst of this team this year. And I expect them to do big things, but I'm excited to see what Dan Enos can do. I believe it's his second stint there at Arkansas. So I like Dan Enos, big fan. I hated him when he was at Alabama, obviously, but I love what he does with his offenses. So I'm excited to see what they do there. But yeah, you're right. They went transfer heavy. They stacked some in the position in the transfer portal that they need. They went on the offensive line and linebacker to get transfers to come in and play. You got Brady Latham and Bo Limmer back on the offensive line, both two big guys. So I expect the offense to be able not to skip a beat. And then you look at their schedule, and they got Western Kentucky or Western Carolina in Little Rock. So it's essentially a home game for them. Then they got Kent State, BYU, and then they go into their SEC play. So they're going to have about 3 weeks to get things, all the kinks and stuff ironed out and get ready to go and get on the same page with everybody. KJ is going to have time to get his confidence in his receivers through the first 3 weeks, and then I think it's time to roll week 4 against LSU. Obviously, tough game to start out your conference play at LSU. But I think those first 3 weeks we're going to really kind of find out what to expect from Arkansas this year.
Yeah, a couple comments I want to make kind of before we dive deeper into the schedule. But you're right about them defensively. I got a few stats here that are mind-boggling, really, for an SEC team and a team that has the kind of talent that they do. Even though they're not one of the more talented SEC teams necessarily, but last year on defense, you mentioned they gave up 30.6 points per game. That was 101st in the country. Interesting stat too. When they scored more than 30, they were 7-0. When they scored less than 30, they were 0-6. So that 30 was the magic number last year. Points per or total yards per game, they were 124th. So 465 a game. Passing yards against 294. Dead last in the country. Rushing yards per game, 170. They were 94th, so not very good either. And then really the most mind-boggling stat for me was 20 explosive plays. They gave up 90 plays of 20 yards or more. Dead last in the country, probably by a good margin if I had to guess. I don't know exactly, but dead last in the country and giving up explosive plays, 90 in 13 games. Like that's insane to me. So that's something, as you mentioned, that's got to be much, much better. I will say this, and listening to Sam Pittman's comments and some of their analysts around the program, they're very excited about their defensive line. They feel like they have maybe the deepest defensive line they've ever had in Arkansas. So they're very high on not only the talent but the depth. They feel that they're 2 and 3 deep at each D line, at defensive end, defensive tackle. So they feel like they've got a lot of guys that can play winning football. So they feel that that's going to help them out a lot this year. And help that secondary improve. And you mentioned they were good at sacking the quarterback last year, so I would expect them to be even better at stopping the run, getting pressure on the quarterback, and I think ultimately that'll help their secondary a lot. They returned several guys back there, so there's no reason they should be as bad as they were. You mentioned their aggression. They're going to blitz a lot. They're going to disguise blitzes, and they have the front, I think, to be able to do that, and they feel like that as well. So that should help them improve those numbers defensively, because they lost 3 games last year by combined 7 points. I think LSU, Missouri, and A&M, I believe. So and that was really the difference. They won 9 games in 2021. They only won 7 last year. So they were real close, a play or two here and there. They had that bad fumble against A&M that cost them. They were playing better than A&M at the time. They had the Harold Perkins game happen to them in Fayetteville, and LSU pulled that one out. They gave them a really good test. And then the Missouri game, they lost by 2 points as well. So it very easily.
And they had a lackluster performance against Liberty and lost by 2 against Liberty.
Yes, that's true as well. So, 3 or 4 really, really close losses that could have went the other way. So if they can kind of have some of those maybe go more in their favor this year, you could have more of a 2021 type of result.
Right.
But it just shows you the thin margin of error in the SEC for sure.
And you gotta just expect or hope that injuries aren't at that big of a deal, especially to their key players. Like KJ was held out of 2 games last year, had a shoulder problem in one, had a concussion in another. They were 0-2 in those games. So I mean, if he's in those games and just say they win, they split those, they get some 8 wins compared to 7 wins. It's a lot better. Sounds a lot better. Looks a lot better. But yes, you're right. They were 1-4 in games last year decided by 3 points or less. That's heartbreaking. That's not getting blown out. That's not saying they're not good enough. That's just there's 1 to 2, maybe 3 plays in that game that cost you that game. So they've got to clean it up. I know Sam Pittman is harping on that, the importance of every single down in the game, especially now with the new clock rule. Clock's going to be running, so you're losing, roughly 10, 11 plays a game. So you're going to really have to, or the offense is going to really have to lock in and figure things out and be precise and execute every single play down to a T, because, 1-4 in games, 3 points or less, that you at least got to be 2-2 in that. You can't be 1-4 or 3-2 or 2-3. Like you can't have the back end loaded on that of losing those. So their schedule's tough, man. Honestly, it is. First 3 weeks. Even week 3, BYU, they're not the worst. You know what I mean? They're no SEC team, but that's not an easy out of conference game. They did handle them last year pretty well. I believe they won 52-35 last year. I expect them to win again big this year. But they're at LSU, then they're a neutral site against A&M, then they're at Ole Miss, then they're at Alabama, and then they finally come back home against Mississippi State. So that's a 4-week stretch there where they are not in Fayetteville. They're not going to have the Hog fans on their side. It is going to be a brutal, brutal schedule. Going A&M, Ole Miss, Alabama back to back to back anyway is tough. But then you throw in LSU at the beginning of that to start out your conference. Man, this is going to be a tough schedule. It's definitely front loaded. The back end is not near as hard for them. That after the Alabama game, they got Mississippi State, Florida, Auburn, FIU, and Missouri. So it's definitely a front loaded schedule that they'll have a chance to clean it up and make it a better year towards the end of the year if they can, steal a game or 2 early in the year and maybe win 9 games, 8 games, something like that. That's what I'm expecting. But man, that stretch from September 23rd to October 14th, that might be one of the toughest stretches in the SEC this year.
Yeah, you're exactly right. That was initially what popped out to me looking at that schedule. I think they're going to have a strong start to the year. I think they're going to finish the year strong, but that middle part, man, is brutal. I don't think anybody has a tougher 4-week stretch in the country this year. I can't think of anybody. I'd have to go comb through everybody's schedule,
yeah.
But
from what teams we've covered, I don't think we've seen a tougher 4-week stretch.
No, and that's the thing too. There's no bye weeks in there. This is a legit 4 straight weeks. You mentioned not in Fayetteville, not even in the state of Arkansas. You're at Baton Rouge. A&M is in Dallas or in Arlington. And then you're at Oxford, at Tuscaloosa. Really, you cannot get much harder than that, honestly.
I bet Sam Pittman would give up half his salary to move that bye week to after Ole Miss. I guarantee he'd give up half his salary to have that happen.
Yeah, it's gonna be a brutal 4-week stretch for sure. That's why it's very important for them to get off to a good start. Those first 3 weeks, and I believe they will. Those games are all at home, so. And I do believe they'll finish strong as well. That they've got their last 3 games at home as well. And or 4 of their last 5 with a trip to Gainesville and kind of in the middle of that. So, but yeah, one of the craziest things too is you look from the 23rd of September till the 11th of November when they play Auburn at home. I believe it's 55 or 56 days. Only 1 home game and almost in 55 days. Like, that's insane to me. It's crazy. Obviously a bye week's in there as well, but man, that's a tough go, but they do start at home. They do finish, most of November at home, which will be helpful down the stretch. Kind of coming off that bye week going into November. So I'm like you. I'm thinking I'm thinking 7 to 8 wins more than likely. I just think I don't know how many they pick off in that 4 week stretch. I mean, they're not going to be favored in any of those games. I mean, especially being away from home. So, I do think they could win. I don't think they win more than one. Probably, I think
Right.
they can get one, but I think 1-3 is probably the most likely scenario in that. But I do think they finish strong on both ends of that the schedule. So yeah, I'm thinking in that 7 to 8 win range. I feel like um, it's going to be along the lines of what they've done the last 2 years. Give or take. I think it's going to be a thin margin of error again. If those one score games go their way, then I think they could overachieve that.
Mhm.
If they don't go their way again, then it's probably going to be a lot like last year. Um, I feel like a lot of the teams in the middle part of the SEC, when you talk about, the Arkansas, the Ole Misses, the Mississippi States, the
Mhm.
South Carolina, Kentucky, like they're they're all really similar. Like they all have their strengths in certain areas, but they just have holes in other areas that kind of keep them from consistently beating some of the top teams in the
Right.
conference. But as we mentioned before, on any given Saturday, these teams are good enough to beat you, to,
Mhm.
to beat some of the best teams in the conference. But they're just probably not going to consistently do it because they don't really have the overall talent week in and week out and the overall depth. Um, but on any given week, they could beat an LSU, A&M, Ole Miss, Alabama. Like they're good enough to do that. But it's going to be hard for them to sustain it for 4 weeks and get 3 or 4 wins in that span. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, again,
But overall, they're
LSU,
really solid.
A&M, Ole Miss, and Alabama. I have them winning one of those games as well. I haven't beaten Ole Miss. I really do think they take it from Ole Miss. So I'm gonna give them the first 3 weeks, giving them Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Florida, Auburn, FIU, Missouri. Honestly, I think they're going to be favored in those games. I think the only toss up in those last 5 games is going to be Auburn, just because it's late in the season, and if Auburn's catching fire, anything can happen. But I honestly think they're going to beat Auburn. So I have them at best going 9-3, but 8-4 is what I really feel like they're going to be this year. I think they're going to go 8-4. But yeah, I mean, you're right. That with that stretch in there, man. I mean, they definitely could lose another one and drop down to 7-5. But I'm really confident in an 8-4 win. So I haven't seen their team total right now. I haven't looked. I haven't even looked when it dropped. I haven't looked now. I don't know what it's moved to or whatever. But if it's 6.5 to 7.5, I would take that over. I really do think they're going to get eight wins this year in the regular season and could potentially get a ninth win in the bowl game. But at best case scenario, I think they go 9-3. But I'm not high on that. I'm more confident in the 8-4 prediction.
Yeah, I'm right in that 7-5, 8-4 area as well. I'm like you. I think they win one of those of the big four, you could say. But then I do feel like they drop one out of that other stretch, either to Mississippi State or Auburn. I think they probably drop one of those. Because I mean that's how a lot of the middle tier teams are in the SEC. They may pick off one
Right.
they may not be favored to beat, but then a lot of times they may drop one like at home to Mississippi State or Auburn, maybe a team that they are favored against, and maybe a team on paper they should be,
Mm-hmm.
but don't. That typically happens with some of these teams just because they're maybe not quite as consistent. Um, and the talent level's not that much difference between them and some of the other comparable teams, obviously.
Right.
So, yeah, I agree with you. I think 7-5, 8-4, just depending on depend on close games, things like that. If they go more their way, then I think that they could overachieve. But overall, I mean, they're a really solid team. Like I said, they're going to have to win some games offensively.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't. I think their defense will be better, but I don't know like how much better it'll be. I mean, I don't expect them to be last in pass defense and explosive plays again. I mean,
They
that
better
that
not
should
be.
that shouldn't happen again. But I don't. I don't think they're necessarily going to be a great defense either. So I think they are going to have to win some games in the upper 20s, 30s, like they did a year ago. So, and I do think they have the capability of
Oh
doing
yeah.
that offensively because they have the weapons, and even though the receivers are inexperienced, at Arkansas, but I do think they have some guys that'll make names for themselves and that are talented. Um, and then obviously they're super deep at running back. So led by Rocket Sanders. So and I am curious to see too if they run KJ Jefferson as much as they did a year ago. I don't. They don't sound like they're going to do that. I think they want to back off on that a little bit. Like you said, he was banged up last year. It's going to be ultra critical that they keep
Yeah.
him healthy the entire year this year. So I don't think they're going to lean on that aspect quite as much as maybe they have the last couple years. And that depth at running back, there's not as much of a need maybe to run him. Maybe pick and choose your spots to do that more often, maybe in some of those bigger games. Um, but the depth at running back, I think, will keep them from having to do that quite as much. Um, and Sam Pittman was saying they are going to throw it more this year as well. So um, I expect them to be pretty balanced overall. But I'm excited to see what they can do and kind of if Sam Pittman can keep building this program and consistently, have them making and winning bowl games. Shifting gears to Kentucky. One of my probably the top sleeper team for me in the SEC. I'm really excited about this team this year. What Mark Stoops it has built there, the consistency, and I'm really excited about their offense. Last year they took a step back offensively. A lot of hype coming into the year, with Will Levis returning. High NFL draft stock, Chris Rodriguez. Just a lot of hype around Kentucky going into last season. It really didn't live up to expectations, especially on that side of the football, that people expected. But I think this is the year that they get back to doing what they did 2 years ago, having a really solid offense. Liam Cohen is back at Kentucky after a year with the Rams. Had, as I mentioned, a great offense in 2021 at Kentucky. They land Devin Leary out of one of the best quarterbacks out of the transfer portal. They land Ray Davis, a really talented running back from Vanderbilt who had 130 yards against Kentucky last year for Vandy.
I believe
And
he was
then
a
I
thousand
think,
yard rusher.
yeah, I think he's a very underrated running back, not only in the SEC but in the country. And then I think one of the most underrated, like not talked about receiver rooms. Like this is a
Oh
great
yeah.
group of pass catchers for Kentucky. I'm expecting really big things out of this offense. We know what they are defensively. 5 out of the last 6 years, they've been a top 25 defense. So we've kind of come to expect that consistency out of Kentucky's defense. Mark Stoops is a defensive coach. He preaches those principles, and they've always had a good defensive staff. But I think this year offensively they get back to what they were doing 2 years ago. I think they've got the right quarterback, a guy that doesn't turn the ball over a whole lot. That was a problem for them last year with Will Levis, even though as talented as he was, had more interceptions than what they would like. But I think this is going to be a really good fit. And he's going to have a great cast of weapons to work with. So kind of just give me your thoughts on this Kentucky offense, just their expectations as a whole this year. I think they could be one of the sleeper teams in the SEC this year.
Absolutely. I wasn't near as high on Kentucky, and then I started digging in and doing my research, and I was like, damn, these guys are actually going to be pretty solid. They're going to be able to put up some points. I mean, you go from 2021 when Liam Cohen was there, 46th overall in total defense. And then last year, 115th in total defense. Had the same quarterback, lost some guys, but not that many. But you return 2 of the best receivers in the SEC in Barry and Brown. He set the freshman record at Kentucky last year for receptions. And then you got Dane Key, who we talked about nonstop last year on the podcast, who set the freshman record for touchdown catches in the season for Kentucky last year. And then you got Travion Robinson coming back. He's a senior. And you got Jordan Dingle at the tight end. They're expected to also play some 2 tight end sets, like I was talking about with Arkansas. So I'm expecting to see Devin Leary, like you said, was probably the number 1 transfer quarterback this year in this cycle. So I'm expecting to see them throw the ball around, let Devin Leary let it eat. I mean, he was a Johnny Unitas Award watch list guy in 2021, kind of got banged up last year. He is fairly injury prone, got hurt week 6 or 7 last year, broke his leg in 2020. He was really healthy in 2021 and had a really good year. So with Liam Cohen coming back, I think that was a big part of what sold him, along with the wide receiver room. It's a young but very talented wide receiver room. So I think that's what sold him on coming there, because I heard, I can't remember where I saw this, but Will Levis sent him a text in the offseason and was like, there's no better coach to develop quarterbacks than Liam Cohen. He was like, he will get you right if you go there. And essentially he got him. Devin Leary decided to go to Kentucky. Liam Cohen, he's there. He only, I believe, I read there's only 3 guys or 4 guys returning that was with him when he was there in 2021. So he's having to, reteach the whole thing. But he's not got some slouch group there. He's got a stacked offense. Like you said, Ray Davis coming in, 1,000-yard rusher from Vandy, so he can do it in the league. He's proven to do it in the league. Their offensive line is pretty much returning everybody except for 1 or maybe 2 guys. But one of the guys that came in as a transfer, or 2 of the guys that came into at left tackle, Marquise Cox, and at right tackle, Cortland Ford. Both of those guys are transferred, played a decent amount of football in their time. So I'm excited to see them. But you also have Jeremy Flax, who returned with a starter last year. So their offense it's going to be, something to reckon with, especially with Liam Cohen back. I think that's the biggest part of why I'm so high on them, because we've seen what he can do. And in my opinion, Devin Leary is a better all-around quarterback than Will Levis. He doesn't have the size, but he got the intangibles, and he's got the stats to prove it and back it up. I mean, you go watch him in 2021 at NC State, and then you watch him in his first 5-6 games last year before he got hurt. I mean, the dude can ball. He said he had an offer from just about every school and every conference when he decided to transfer out of NC State. So he was a hot commodity, and for good reason. And you're right, their defense has just become it's second nature to them to be dominant. I don't expect anything less from them. But after the spring practice, after one of their spring practices, Mark Stoops had to get on to them a little bit. He said that they seemed entitled, and they weren't earning it, and there was no leadership. And so he pretty much challenged his team to step up and for some leaders to emerge. And that, that's what you need. But falling off from a 10-win season in 2021, going to, I believe they won 7 games last year. Yeah, 7-6 last year. I mean, that's a big fall off. That's not just 1 or 2 games, man. I mean, they kind of, I don't know. They looked like they were scrambling a lot last year. Not in the sense of running, but like they were trying to just scratch and claw for anything they could get. Nothing was going their way. They were bitten by the turnover bug, man. I mean, there was nothing just seemed right. Everything seemed off, like they were just skipping a beat. So I'm excited to see this team. But you look at their schedule here, man. 6 of their first 7 weeks. Yeah, 6 of their first 7 games, I think they should win. I mean, you got Ball State, Eastern Kentucky, Akron, Vanderbilt, and Florida as your first 5 weeks. I think you start out 5-0. You go to Athens, you ain't winning that game unless a miracle happens. I just don't think it's going to happen. Then you bounce back against Missouri, so that means you're sitting at 6-1 going to host Tennessee. Now we've covered Tennessee. We know I think that Tennessee is going to beat Kentucky, but I think that this is a pretty favorable schedule for Kentucky. I mean, they can get off at 5-0. You never know what could happen. Their confidence could be high. They could be clicking on all cylinders. But I expect this team to have a lot of wins and a lot of wins early. But the back of that schedule is kind of backloaded for sure. And you got Georgia, then Tennessee, Mississippi State, and Alabama, and then you go to South Carolina. I think it's a lot of the same with Arkansas. I think they go best 9-3. But I'm feeling like an 8-4 for Kentucky as well. I feel it's kind of weird. We've been picking the teams, and then when we look at the schedule, and I feel like we kind of make I feel like the teams we're previewing that we feel like they're going to have the same type of year. We don't do that on purpose. That's the way it's unfolded. I feel like, but I think they're going to win about 8 games this year, maybe nine at best. I just their schedule is definitely helpful in the early parts to get them on the right track and to get them comfortable and get their confidence going. But then you go into Georgia, man, and then Tennessee 2 weeks later. That's tough. I mean, or 3 weeks later, you got a bye week after Missouri, so that'll help. Hosting Tennessee after a bye week, be rested up, work out what you need to work out, get some game plan. You get 2 whole weeks to prepare for them, so they potentially could win 9-10 games, but I'm thinking it's more going to be 8 to 9 wins.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that last 5 week stretch is really tough. I think very like you said, I think 6-1 going into that Tennessee game. I believe that's correct. Yeah, 6-1 going into the Tennessee game. And to be honest, looking at this Kentucky team, I'm pretty high on Tennessee. I think they're a top 15 type of team. Could win double digit games again. I'll be honest. I mean, that's going to be a tough game for Tennessee. I feel like. I mean, I think that's one that could be the one game Kentucky kind of pulls a shocker, and maybe takes that next step and beats a team maybe that they shouldn't. I think that's one for Tennessee I would be careful about. So I think Kentucky may could get them. I'm not willing to say for sure. Obviously, we don't know, but I do feel like that's one they could grab. I think that would go a long way. I mean, that would have them at 7-1 for that stretch run. But yeah, at Mississippi State, Alabama, at South Carolina, and I think Louisville is going to be a sneaky good team in the ACC as well. So I think Louisville is going to be much better. So that's not an easy game to end the regular season either. So yeah, I mean. I do think this team has the potential to pull an upset like that. But can they pick off 1 or 2 in those final 4 is gonna really determine if they can, maybe reach or exceed expectations this year. Can they go on the road to Starkville and get a win? Can they go to Columbia and get a win? A team, they're gonna be closely battling with in the East. So if they're able to grab a game or 2 like that, I think they could get to probably 9-3. But
the only thing that I think that they don't get Tennessee and they definitely don't get Georgia and they might slip up against Mississippi State is the defensive side of the ball that they lack depth or they lack talented depth. That I think obviously any team that's going to hurt them in the back half of the schedule, and that's when their toughest games come along is the back half of the schedule, and not having super talented depth on the defensive side of the ball, it's definitely going to catch up with them at some point. It might only be for one game, but it's going to catch up to them at some point. And I think, man, Tennessee, Mississippi State, Alabama, South Carolina, that 4-week stretch, you're going to have your guys stay healthy. They're going to need some guys to step up if they're not expecting to play this year, not expecting to have a whole lot of playing time or meaningful playing time anyway. Guys are going to have to step up if they want to prayer late in the season, because depth is everything at this level and in this league. And if they're lacking that on the defensive side of the ball, that could end up biting them in the rear end towards the end of the season.
Yeah, I think who knows? Tennessee may be an offensive juggernaut at that point. It may be a mute point. I guess my thinking on it is coming off a bye week. Mm-hmm. It's before that really brutal stretch at the end of the year, and I just, with the way the schedule set up, I think the vibes are going to be very high in Lexington if we do what we think they should do in the first 7. I think it's very possible. They really should, just on paper, they're better than Missouri. They're better than Florida. Mm-hmm. Those games are at home. They're better than Vandy. They're better than the first 3 for sure. So, yeah, they're probably not going to fare well in Athens, I'm sure. But really, on paper, this team should come in 6-1. Going into the bye week with Tennessee, I think that could be one of the bigger home games Kentucky's had in a long time, especially if Tennessee's kind of where we think they're going to be as well. So, I don't know.
Game day? We thinking game day?
It honestly could be. I don't know. I just have a gut feeling. I just think, too, those receivers are going to be tough for Tennessee to match up with. I think that
That's
could be a
true.
shootout, honestly. At Kroger
So
Field, we could
so
have a shootout.
early call, hammer the over in Lexington when Tennessee comes to town.
October 28th, Kroger Field in Lexington, Kentucky. It's going to be a shootout. Tennessee does not want to see Barron Brown,
We're
Dane
calling
Key,
it now.
Tavion Robinson. I'm telling you, they could get loose, and I think Tennessee's receivers are going to get loose on them as well. So I think this could be a old fashioned shootout. So I don't know. I don't know if Kentucky will pull that off. Obviously, it's August and this game's late October, so there's no telling what could happen by now. Tennessee could beat them by 40. I don't know, but
Yeah, but what fun is that? We want to tell people to hammer
yeah,
their over in October 28th. We ain't even halfway through August yet.
yeah. So I mean, we're a couple of amateur podcasters, so if we say something, get it wrong, it's not that big of a deal. But anyways, no, I'm excited for that one. I think I don't know. I just if the vibes and if they take care of business like I think they should and like they feel they should, just based on what they have returning. And you do make a good point too. They are more inexperienced defensively than they have been probably the last few years. They don't return a ton of starters. I do think they're going to be pretty good up front though. A couple new starters in the secondary. That's kind of the reason I think that game could be a shootout, just because both secondaries are probably not going to be, maybe up to par, especially Kentucky's of what they had. Tennessee, we know their struggles in the secondary. So I just think there's a lot of weapons on the field that day. So
absolutely. And looking at the projected backup guys on the defense side of the ball, of the 11 projected backup guys, only 2 were seniors. The rest of them are freshmen and sophomores. So that's just a huge question mark. I mean, they got a lot of sophomores and juniors starting for them, a couple of seniors, but as backups projected anyway, only 2 being seniors, the rest freshmen and sophomores. That's just a big question mark. Not saying they can't figure it out and lock in and be, play like with their hair on fire every week and, have a top defense in the nation. And like you said, that we've come to expect that from Kentucky. But just looking at that second string depth chart, that's the biggest question mark for me going into this season for Kentucky.
Yeah, but and same here. Like we mentioned, they're not as experienced as they have been. I do think the continuity they've had with their defensive staff. I actually went back and listened to Mark Stoops' comments at media day. Brad White, the defensive coordinator, they've had some really good defensive coaches there. Matt House, who's at LSU now, was there. John Summerall, the head coach at Troy now. So they've had some really good coaches and guys they develop as coaches on that side of the ball. So I do think that continuity, as Mark Stoops alluded to, has really helped them. So I do, and they do have some really good pieces here. Deion Walker at defensive tackle is going to be is a really good player for them. And Jordan Lovett really emerged last year due to injury, got put in the starting lineup, and he was a freshman All-American type of player. So they're expecting some big things out of him this year, kind of leading that secondary really. So I do think, they have such a track record defensively. As I mentioned earlier, 5 of the last 6 years having a top 25 defense. So they just have such a track record and the continuity on that side of the ball. I guess even when they're a little bit more inexperienced, I just have confidence in their scheme and their coaching staff to kind of get those guys up to speed, just because we've seen them do it so many times. They've just been so consistent on that side of football. But offensively is really where I expect them to take a lead, because any way you slice it, the offense wasn't nearly good enough last year.
No.
I mean, they averaged 20 points a game. I mean, that's not going to cut it. I mean, really, you average 20 points a game. It's a miracle you even won 7 games and being in the SEC.
From 31.8 points a game, number 38 in the country, to 20.4 points a game, 111th in the country. That is a tremendous slide down the rankings, dude. 38 or 38th, to 101st. That can't happen. That cannot happen.
No, and they've just got too many weapons this year. As you mentioned earlier, the offensive line, that's really the biggest question for me. I think is even though they have a lot of starters returning, they had a hard time keeping Will Levis upright last year. That we talked about that most of the year. That was really their Achilles heel, and probably a big reason for a lot of these slides and statistics, just because they couldn't keep him upright enough. That forced some turnovers. You know, him trying to make a play, trying to force things. The offense was struggling a lot of times. So, guys were pressing a little bit. So, if they can kind of shore up that offensive line a little bit, the other pieces are in place. I mean, Devin Leary's a guy that does not turn the football over much, and he, like I said, he's got a cast of weapons to throw to. I mean, two of the better sophomore receivers. I mean, Baron Brown and Dane Key. Like, I think you could put a different helmet on this receiver group, and I think he'd be considered one of the best in the country, probably.
Oh, hands
like
down.
it would be up there, But I think they're probably being overlooked a little bit because it's Kentucky, you
Mm-hmm.
know, maybe not get quite as much respect. But I mean, honestly, I think you could slap Alabama helmet on some of these guys, and they would be considered, one of the better rooms in the country, maybe. So,
Absolutely.
I
What do
mean, I
you
feel that highly about them. So,
how many wins? What's the win total you think for them?
well, I'm gonna say I'm kind of I'm thinking like like you've mentioned. I feel like I've said like 8 wins for almost everybody,
Yeah.
but we do have Missouri and Vandy coming up in our previews. Y'all be sure to tune in for those. So that's where we're gonna make up some of our some of our losses, I should say. But yeah, I'm feeling like that 8-4 kind of vibe because I think they start out strong. Who knows? Maybe they can pull that one off against Tennessee, but the back half's going to be very tough. It kind of reminds me of Ole Miss's schedule from
Yeah.
last year a little bit. Maybe not quite as extreme, but
I was going to say that,
fairly
like,
close.
starting out hot, but maybe ending bad.
Yeah. Like I said, maybe not quite to that extreme, but it gives me that kind of feel to it.
Yeah.
Not very manageable to start off. Like I said, feel like they should be 6-1, but those last five, or some of those are coin tosses at best. Some they're not going to be favored in. I mean, they're probably not going to be favored in many of those final
Mm-mm.
five, but
Mm-mm.
if any at all. But if they can get a few of those games, at Mississippi State, to me that feels like a coin toss type of game.
I
I
have that
think
written
that's a
right here.
manageable one for them. That's
100%.
one they need to have. At South Carolina, I feel like they're going to be battling for them third in the East. I feel like that could decide it there. But that's late in the year. That's right before South Carolina plays Clemson, so that's kind of a tough area of the schedule for South Carolina also. So, but I feel like that's a game that you can make a case either way. So, and then Louisville, I think that's going to be a tough game in the regular season. I do think Louisville's probably a little underrated, but that's a game they can win also. So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I'm feeling. I think 8-4. Maybe they win a bowl game, get 9, but yeah, I'm feeling 8 or 9, probably. But I do think this is a team that could maybe they get over the hump and beat a team they kind of maybe they get a signature win like a Tennessee. I think they could have the capability of doing that. So I'm really excited to see what they have this year. I'm gonna keep a close eye on Kentucky this year.
It definitely wouldn't be as shocking as like Missouri or Vandy beating Tennessee, something like that. Like this wouldn't be something you're scratching your head after the game. Like, how did that just happen? You're going to understand like, okay, this team they're legit. They're for real. You're not just going to roll out there and beat them. You're going to have to, give it everything you got. It's not one of those games like Ball State or Eastern Kentucky. You can just roll out there. Tennessee's going to have to bring their A game if they want to beat Kentucky, and same with Kentucky. They're going to have to bring their A game. But if Tennessee's playing their B minus C plus game, and Kentucky comes out there, it could be a long night for them at home for Tennessee at home.
Yeah, and
for Tennessee on the road. Excuse me.
The crazy thing is too, this team played Georgia about as well as anybody last year. I mean, they only lost 16-6. I mean, obviously Georgia,
Defensively, yeah, they stood them up for real.
they struggled, a little early. They had that game against Missouri where they
Mm-hmm.
struggled, just kind of had an off night. I think they played. It wasn't Sanford, but it was kind of a lower school that scored some points on them. They had like a 2 week stretch where they
Mm-hmm.
didn't really, play very well. But really, the back half of the season, Kentucky played them as well as anybody did. I mean, to hold that offense to 16 points is pretty impressive.
Kirby was pissed.
Yeah, and I'm looking at their offensive stats. I'm kind of surprised they scored 6 on them. To be honest with you, knowing Georgia's defense and
Was it a
what
touchdown
Kentucky,
or was it 2 field goals? I don't remember.
I don't either. I think it was a touchdown, and they maybe went for 2 or something.
Right.
I vaguely remember it, um, but anyway, so that is something that can give them a little confidence. They did play them pretty tough, but um, overall though, I think this is a really really solid team. And I'm looking forward to see what they can do this year. And you mentioned before with Mark Stoops' contract, I believe if he gets 10 wins, doesn't he get an additional 2 years? Is that right on his contract? So
Every time he gets 10 wins, he gets an additional 2, plus some money, obviously. And I could be wrong on this part, but I think if he gets 9 wins, he might get an extra year. But I know for a fact if he gets 10 or more wins, he gets an extra 2 years every time, no matter what.
yeah, I think this is a team that could be capable of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they will get 10, but more so than last year, I do think this is a team that I could very well see them winning 10. So
If
this
they
team
win
to
10,
me,
Liam Cohen is there until he dies as OC.
oh yeah, yeah. If he turns this offense around and
Again?
it does what they do 2 years ago, um, and like I said, I think they have the pieces to do it. So I
Yeah.
wouldn't be surprised at all. I actually expect him to turn around again. So, yeah, I think Liam Cohen he will probably be staying in Lexington a little longer after this year. I'm sure. So, didn't go the way he wanted to with the Rams. I don't even think he called plays
He
out there.
didn't. He didn't call play.
So
I know he was. I know he was sick going there, taking that job, and then not calling the plays. He had to have been sick.
yeah, so I know Mark Stoops, just listen to him at media days, he was extremely excited to have him back, and rightfully so. So, yeah, I'm excited to see this team. Think they're going to sneak up on some people probably. But I was kind of like you. I knew they were solid. I didn't really know what to expect, but
Mm-hmm.
that's why I love doing these
Oh
previews
yeah,
because like once I really dove into it, um, man, I was impressed. I was like, wow, offensively on paper, they're better than I thought they were. Defensively, we mentioned the inexperience a little bit, but they have that kind of track record. So, yeah, it's going to be a solid team. The depth of this league, we talk about it all the time, but it's incredible. It's only going to get better with Texas and OU coming in next year. So it's just, man, there's so many quality teams that win like 7, 8 games, but these teams are really good. I
yeah.
mean, it's tough, but I think this Kentucky, I think they're a top 25 kind of team this year.
I agree. I don't think that's an outlandish statement to make, especially with Liam Cohen and Devin Leary being there.
We're through. We've previewed 10 SEC teams
Mm-hmm.
now, so we got 4 more to go the next 2 weeks. We're only 3 weeks away from Florida and Utah playing on a Thursday night. This is Wednesday night, August 9th. So yeah, 3 weeks from tomorrow from Florida, Utah. We've got Vandy, who we still got a preview, by the way, against Hawaii week 0
Yep.
again. So expect Clark Lay. Bold prediction: Clark Lay's starting out 1-0 again. Because I don't know if you heard too, but about they're putting down new turf, I think, or something, and it got delayed by like weather or something. So I don't even think they can play their first couple games at home or like the first couple weeks or something.
Jesus Christ.
So I think they're having to, like, I think they'll have to play Hawaii somewhere else, like somewhere else in Nashville or something. I don't know, but
That's embarrassing.
yeah. Anyways, yeah, they had some I don't know all the details exactly, but I think they had a little delay on their field renovation. So yeah, they're going to be playing somewhere else, I
I
think,
know
at
the
least.
project manager for that job is absolutely pissed.
Yeah, it's poor Vandy too. It's always a road game at home for them. I feel like, especially when they play, some of the bigger teams in the league. But shout out to them though. I mean, they are he has improved them. I mean, it doesn't show on the win total as much, but they're definitely headed in the right direction. I mean, he has improved them for sure. So I think he's got things kind of trending in the right
Mhm.
direction. Maybe their turf not so much, but I guess since we're talking about Vandy, we can do them next week. So we'll early tease that we're doing
There you
Vandy
go.
as one of the teams next week. So the other one is TBD. So uh, but
You
anyways,
got
we
two
really
guesses. You got two guesses.
yeah, you got two guesses because it's somebody from the West. So but anyways, just really appreciate everybody tuning in. Uh, like the video on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. We really appreciate it. Yeah, we've really enjoyed doing these previews, and now we're mid-August. Teams have started to get pads on in fall camp, so we're just weeks away now. Couldn't Speaking for both of us here, we couldn't be more excited, and
Finally, we're here. We're the best time of the year.
yeah, looking forward to coming back next week and discussing it again. But we really appreciate all of you tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week.
See you guys.